name is Erika Parente, and I'm the Director of Farming as a Service. And I'm delighted to be hosting today's conversation about what is needed to solve the agricultural challenges in the MENA region. We have some wonderful guests joining us. It's my pleasure to introduce India Langely, the Food Systems Research and PR Lead at Let Us Grow. And we also have Caleb Wilkins, the CEO of Renaissance Ag, joining us. I believe we're also just waiting for Paul to join us, Paul Edmondon, the Chief Scientist, Researcher, and Technical Sales at 5. So he may be just dropping in a little bit late, but we'll wait for him to see if he joins in a few minutes. In the meantime, I just wanted to say thank you again for joining in, and to our speakers for taking the time to come and chat with us. I've been really looking forward to having this conversation with all of you to get some of your thoughts on and ideas around agricultural challenges in the MENA region, and to really hear what your perspective is on how indoor agricultural technologies or just ag tech in general can help and be of service in that region. As Cultivated also heads to Dubai next week for AgraME, this conversation is really timely for us to have these conversations. And when we enter a new market, it's really important for us to understand the context and the conditions of agriculture so that we can better support those who are in those domestic regions, answer their questions and support them with whatever innovations they're looking to bring into those regions. So with that, let's get started. So the first topic I'd like us to focus on is on food security. And over the past 2 decades, agricultural imports in the Middle East and North Africa have been close to 16 to 20 billion USD. And that's due to the region's limited agricultural potential related to water scarcity and limited arable land. It's also expected that the MENA region economies will continue to rely heavily on food imports to feed the growing populations. So India, I was wondering if you could start us off by explaining a little bit about which innovations in ag tech, current or future, you believe will contribute most to reducing the MENA region's dependency on food imports.
Yes, absolutely. So when the limiting factors for domestic production are water and fertile land, the obvious innovation to implement is vertical farming. So vertical farming doesn't require any fertile land to operate, and it actually reduces water use by as much as 95% compared to traditional outdoor farming. So it's not really surprising that the world's largest farm, Eco1, is actually situated in Dubai. However, a really important drawback to consider with vertical farming is the amount of energy that it uses. And it uses this to power lights and, very importantly, to maintain suitable and stable growing temperatures for crops to grow in. And this can impact not just the sustainability of a project, but also its economics, its bottom line as well. Luckily, the MENA region is blessed with all of the natural resources necessary for a really vibrant renewable energy infrastructure. So it's got lots of sunshine, strong winds, and in a few places it's got some really powerful rivers as well. So I guess to answer your question, what I think the most powerful agri-tech innovation will be, and it will be in the very, very near future, is sort of seamless integration between on-site renewable energy production and vertical farms so that they can really work together very sort of synergistically. And I think this could be a real game changer for the region and, quite honestly, I think for the world.
That's really interesting perspective to have, the unification of those two things. I'm just wondering, out of curiosity, if there's an example of that, a project like that you see working right now that maybe you could chat a little bit about.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a really amazing project called Flex Farming. They have a project called Farm as a Battery. And what this does is it uses vertical farms to sort of stabilize the energy supply. So with renewable energy, it can be kind of intermittent on a short-term scale. So when the wind is blowing, when the sun is shining, and things along those lines. And you can essentially use a vertical farm like a battery to absorb the power and combine that with battery systems to maintain a really stable energy supply system for that area. They sync up really well to do with that. You're essentially using the plants as energy storage in their own way.
Oh, wow, that's really exciting. I definitely think that will definitely be a huge value add to this region as technology becomes more accessible and more affordable as well for larger projects of that kind of scale. That's great. Caleb, do you have anything to add to that question around innovations in ag tech and which ones you think either current or future are going to have the most impact in reducing the dependency of food imports for the MENA region?
Yeah, I have a few things to add, and I think you're right, India, and you touched on some really important points. I think another aspect of this is that, of course, food security goes hand in hand with domestic food production, and that to truly have food security, you must be able to produce your food domestically, which is a complicated suggestion. There's nothing as simple as saying it's required to produce it domestically. It's very hard to do so, as there's multiple systems that have to work together. Also, in that complex relationship, traditionally, agri-tech and controlled environment agriculture has started off with thinking about leafy greens and fruits and vegetables. However, it may be that the most important aspect of domestic food production for food security is the production of meat, milk, and eggs, which are, rich in protein, energy, minerals, vitamins, and correlate with, lifting folks out of poverty. And there has not been as much focus, especially in the media and the news, about controlled environment agriculture for livestock production. And if it is true that livestock production is a core element, and we propose that it is, but if it is true that's a core element of domestic food production and food security, then the production of livestock feed becomes incredibly important. And that becomes part of that calculation for domestic production. How do I bring the ability to create livestock feed in country? And how do I do it in a way that regenerates itself? So I'm not constantly importing a key element. For example, if we're producing forages domestically, the natural burden in the MENA region would be to import your seed. Well, that still puts us in a critical position where we're importing something that is very important for the production of those livestock forages, or we're using a tremendous amount of water. So I think there's a real burden on controlled environment agriculture and agri-tech to produce livestock feed domestically for the MENA region.
Absolutely. I know that there's another question in the future about animal feed, so we'll elaborate a little bit more on that as well, Caleb. But thank you for adding that. I think it's it's often not discussed enough about how animal feed really does have an impact. The fact that that in the MENA region they import 90% of product for animal feed is, quite an outstanding number when you think about that, right? The limited security they have for animal producers and dairy producers within that region is a little bit eye-opening when you think about how much is dependent on imports and how much imports can be impacted by government or political conditions in a region or different parts of the world. So I think that's a super valuable add. Thank you. Hi, Paul. Welcome on stage. Thanks so much for
Hello,
joining
folks.
us.
Yes, my apologies. The technology, we're much better at growing things than we are getting online. So I'm sure.
No.
Yeah.
No worries at all. We're just glad you made it. We had a few challenges backstage coming in, so I apologize. I think we were a minute late anyway, so no worries.
Good.
We're just glad you're here. We're going to switch the focus a little bit to water scarcity. And water scarcity next to food security represents the region's greatest agricultural threat. Although the MENA has an abundance of land, much of it can't be used for agriculture because there's not enough water to efficiently raise crops or crops for feed, and therefore animal production as well becomes a challenge. So the region also suffers from inefficient use of existing water resources. So these combinations of things, along with the climate conditions, greatly impact crop productivity and land aggregation. So Paul, since you've joined us, put you in the hot spot,
Sure.
Maybe you have some ideas for what ag tech solutions and or crop choices can be introduced to increase the efficiency and productivity of agricultural water use in the area.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think primarily we do vertical farming, and we have a tremendous belief that can address water issues from a standpoint that is very common knowledge that about 90% less water use than traditional agriculture. And I've been growing things for over 50 years now, and a variety of different methodologies, and I can attest to that. That in fact, when we are growing things hydroponically and vertically, the plants grow much quicker, of course, but also the water use. You don't lose the same, anywhere near the same. Matter of fact, you lose probably less than 10% of the water that you would lose in the outside. So I think, given the region, given all of the limitations and also the opportunities there, I think that vertical farming has a tremendous future. Some of the things that we have to look for as far as establishing the vertical farms, much the same. We have installations around the world, and always the number one challenge is funding. I mean, that's just the bottom line. And once you address the funding issue, you can start to move forward. The exciting thing about that challenge is, frankly, that people are starting to understand how impactful a vertical farm can be in a very positive way. And so the funding is beginning to loosen up, if you will, and may become more available. Additionally, because of the fact that you need investors, and investors primarily want to invest and make a difference, of course. But with some of the artificial intelligence we're applying in our racking system now, you can also keep track of how the plants are growing and how your investments are growing. So I bring that up because that is one of the primary hurdles, is the funding. And and we're seeing that now with vertical farming being a reasonably new innovation, a new entity, although hydroponics growing is not. I think all of those things are beginning to enable places around the world to implement the vertical farming piece.
And I think you make a good point there, Paul, around the access to funding and how that grows. And I think in a region like the MENA region, where you have so many countries who are now starting to really focus on the water piece and how they're currently using water, how they decide to invest in using water in the future, because it is absolutely critical right now when we look at population growth and where food production needs to be in order to sustain that level of growth in this region. So the access to funding has always been a huge barrier. It's a barrier no matter where you are, whether you're in North America or if you're in the Middle East and Asia, funding can always be a challenge. But when you have different values associated with indoor farming, for instance, where you can prove that it's reducing water consumption and how that then applies to the sustainability of a region and food production of a region, I think funding becomes a lot more accessible when the value add is really transparent and shown and proven, quite frankly, through different types of technologies. So yeah, that's a great contribution. Thank you so much, Paul. India, did you want to add anything around agricultural water use in the area?
Yes. Absolutely, and I'm very much going to be following on from Paul's point about vertical farming. I will include greenhouse farming in this as well, but generally speaking, irrigation is going to be fundamental, really, really important if you want to be looking at water use in the area. You're going to want to make sure that you can absolutely maximize the output from a very, very limited water supply. So aeroponics isn't as a type of irrigation system that can actually do a lot with a very, very small amount of water. The aeroponic method grows plants without soil, and instead plant roots are suspended in the air and then irrigated with a nutrient-dense mist. And this is a little bit different to the hydroponic systems that you would usually see in a vertical farm or in a greenhouse, where the plant roots are submerged instead in a nutrient-rich solution. And because of this, it uses, similar to what Paul said, 95% less water than growing outdoors, but it also uses 30% less water than traditional hydroponic systems. And the reason for this is that the body of water that you're starting with initially is just that much smaller to create mist, because you don't have to submerge the roots. As well as actually reducing the amount of water, which is obviously really important. It's actually really good for plant productivity as well. So because the plants aren't submerged, they have greater access to oxygen around the roots. And this is a lot more similar to how plants would be in their natural soil environment, where they would have air pockets all around the roots. And what this does is it results in much healthier plants and significantly faster crop growth rates. When you have faster growth rates, you actually can get more cycles in a year, and then you can improve your yields. So you can improve your yields with less water. So alongside irrigation, the other thing that's going to be really fundamental is recapture of water, treatment, and then reuse of it. This is fundamental to improving water security, sort of whatever system that you're using. And it's actually something that we incorporate into all of our aeroponic systems, not just the ones that would be going out to arid regions like the MENA region, but also in Europe and the UK. I think we sometimes forget that we need to be conserving water everywhere. So it's not just relevant in the MENA region.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think considering that hydroponics had the greatest, I guess the largest segment of market share in the MENA marketplace in 2021, we're actually seeing that shift towards aeroponics. And it's expected to be the fastest growing segment for indoor farming from 2021 to 2028. So it's definitely, we're seeing that being a more attractive option in these areas where there's so much focus on how to conserve water and how to ensure that every drop of water is really being accounted for and showing the results for crop production. So I think that's a really great point that you brought up. Thanks so much, India.
Erika, if I may just continue on that for just a second.
Please do, but by all means.
Yeah, we're talking about hurdles there. Of course, we just talked about funding it. The infrastructure in the area is also important. The ability to construct a building or retrofit a facility, and I think that's a critical element of being able to adapt to an existing facility, or use a pre-existing facility, but also expand upon it. And the other thing is electricity. That's common to all of these indoor or controlled ag facilities, no matter what you're doing, hydroponics, traditional greenhouse, or aeroponics. And having that infrastructure, that power available, is a critical element also. Obviously, in this area, we're talking about the potential for solar. We've tried it around in other places, and just the large need for power precludes having a 500-acre solar farm, or something of that nature. We've also then set up systems with generators, which obviously the plants are going to be only needing their light around 12 hours to 14 hours a day. Those generators run 24 hours a day, and that can be another source of revenue, setting up a local power grid if necessary. And we also have a scrubber system on our generator that takes out the CO2 and re-injects that from the exhaust into the facility. So I think there's a lot of ways to address the infrastructure issue, and in areas where the access to cooling or refrigeration or what have you is not as readily available as in other areas. I think having the materials that you're growing, the plants, as close to the consumer as possible is a very desirable way to go. And I think the localized growing is critical to that.
Absolutely. Yeah, infrastructure is a huge key point there, Paul. Thank you so much for saying that. Caleb, I just wanted to give you an opportunity if you had anything to add onto this piece of the discussion.
Just a couple of things. I agree with Paul on infrastructure, and I agree with India on efficient usage of water in producing food in these vertical farms. I think there's a couple of other burdens that we should be talking about as well. One is that economically we are competing with other models that generate more revenue than agriculture. For example, filling a swimming pool at a high-end hotel, washing the cars, washing the windows at those hotels, washing your clothing, food prep at high-end restaurants. And so there is a lot of competition for that initial water required in vertical farming. So we need to think about how we get it, not just how we efficiently use it, but novel ways to acquire that water, whether we're reusing gray water that is being produced by those other mechanisms, those other models that compete with us. So how do we reuse that properly without passing on something that we don't want to pass on to the end consumer? How do we capture that water? Then once we have it and we're using it efficiently, is there a way to leverage that efficient use and reduce the overall need for production? For example, as Paul mentioned about infrastructure and proximity to the consumer, if we can figure out a way to reduce the waste so that I don't have to produce 100 kilotons or 100 kilograms of something, I only need to produce 90 because there was 10% waste. If I can reduce that 10% waste, that 30% waste, I now no longer need to spend the money, the energy, and the infrastructure and the water to produce 100 kilograms. I can now just produce 70 or 80 or 90, be more efficient. There's another aspect that builds off of that for the livestock side of things. As we're looking at bringing in this domestic capacity to generate livestock feed, through vertical farming, there's an opportunity to deliver a premium livestock feed that reduces the overall need for dry matter in a livestock diet. And what I mean by that is maybe I had to produce 5 tons of hay to get one cow over the course of a year to do something. But with a premium feed that we're generating through vertical farming, maybe now I only need to produce 4 tons of hay. So the overall burden on production is reduced. And I think there's an opportunity to do that in all types of vertical farming, not just in livestock feed, but in leafy greens and fruits and vegetables, where we think about, is there an opportunity to reduce the production requirement because we're reducing waste, we're close in proximity to the consumer, and we're being really good about handling the plants, keeping contagion down, minimizing mold, minimizing bacterial outbreaks, being segmented in our approach so that the cost of production is reduced, but also the amount of production required is reduced. I think that's an important aspect of water management. Recycling, as India talked about, is crucial. We must do it. Proximity and good infrastructure, as Paul talked about, is also crucial. But I think we need to think of novel ways to acquire water because we're competing with other things that generate more revenue in real time. And then I also think we need to think about how do we reduce the need to produce so much by reducing waste, of course, but also by being more efficient in what we produce.
Absolutely. That's a great summary, Caleb. And I think you're 100% right. The thinking about it in terms of how and where we get things from is, I think, sometimes not the first way we think in society about these types of things, right? Where did I get my product from the grocery store? In the simplest terms, is something we're trying to teach and encourage among people for people in society to think more about. So it goes the same way when we think about building infrastructures or new types of technology within the vertical farming space. Having that same mindset. It's not just a resource we need. Sorry, my dog is not happy right now. But it's not just something we need in order to produce, but we need to think about where is that coming from and how do we make sure that where we're getting something from is, like you said, could be somewhere more novel than what we're used to thinking about. And all of that is just this thinking about things in a circular economy, I think is really helpful. So great point as well. Thank you all for those great contributions. Let's talk a little bit about land scarcity, because I think, as we all know that as a result of changes in climate, poor agricultural practices, and existing inheritance laws, countries in the MENA region are losing large areas of agricultural land every year. While this is occurring, MENA's cultivated land use is continuing to expand. And from there, they're really expected to increase their maximum utilization potential as population grows. So India, considering the region's land scarcity and rapid expansion challenges, do you see vertical farms as an efficient and sustainable way of growing more food on less land?
The small print is yes, but essentially, if you want to grow on a small footprint, you've essentially got 2 options. You can either be intensifying your production, or you can be growing upwards, so in vertical farms. Intensifying production comes at a risk because you can damage the land that you're working on, and in the long term, this means that you can actually end up with less fertile land than when you started with, which is obviously a problem if you're struggling with land scarcity in the first place. So ideally, you would want to be using regenerative farming practices when you're farming outdoors to build up land fertility. Unfortunately, these kinds of practices can actually be very expansive, so this means that they take up a lot of space. And this is just because that they produce less food on the same amount of land. If you contrast that to a sort of vertical farm, that doesn't need to be situated on fertile land, as we've sort of all mentioned earlier. And sort of by investing in vertical farming infrastructure, you can actually increase the amount that you can produce without impacting the land. And this takes pressure off the land that you're farming outside. Now, obviously, I'm not positioning vertical farming and outdoor farming as a sort of either or kind of solution. I think that there are plenty of things that we can probably all agree don't make a huge amount of sense to grow in a vertical farm. Grains is a sort of classic example. Something doesn't work really well. You want to be focusing on leafy greens, vegetables, fruits, things like tomatoes and strawberries. But I think something that could be really beneficial is actually finding the right balance between growing really intensively indoors and sort of getting the most out of your resources and really maximizing the potential of those resources, and then growing regeneratively outside using agroecological resources. And this can allow the MENA region to grow more on less land in a way that can last for generations.
Yeah, absolutely. Paul, did you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I think there's some opportunities here that aren't obviously in front of us right at the minute, and that is that it can be a cooperation between a vertical farm and a greenhouse, for example. We have a model that we've been working on that, for example, if you're looking at 30 days to grow a plant, 10 or X number of days are grown in the vertical farm, and then it is put out into a greenhouse scenario, maybe a deep water culture with rafts and all the rest. Existing, it could possibly be existing. And what that would do is that it will significantly increase the amount of plant material in a particular cohort. Obviously, if you're 10 days in and then you're going to do 20 days out, you can increase rather than having 10, 10, and 10. And that first 10 is very intensive, where in fact the real estate, if you will, in the rack is much tighter. The plants are growing in a much smaller footprint. And then when they finally do get to the greenhouse, you can produce more with the existing greenhouse. And our model we had developed was showing that one vertical farm could supply between 12 and 15 conventional greenhouses. So you can multiply that vertical farm. It doesn't have to be only from seed to sale. You know, from seed to a fully grown plant. There's another option there. So that's something to consider. Additionally, I think the vertical aspect is the critical piece. The higher you go, and we go up to about 20 levels, the fixed costs begin to be reduced per plant. So not only is it more profitable, but it's also more efficient. The other piece I want to, and then I'll stop, is the fact growing the correct cultivars. We have cultivars and trays that do 32 plants because they're more of a horizontal habit. We also have a 60 spot tray for growing vertical cultivars. So you can almost double the amount of material that you grow if you select the correct cultivar. And so I think there are tricks like that you can use to increase the productivity and obviously the food for the folks.
Absolutely. Thanks, Paul. I love what you said about using vertical farming, not just necessarily from seed to sale, but for other purposes like supporting greenhouse production and being able to scale your greenhouse infrastructure itself, but not necessarily having to start them in the greenhouse. You can start them in a vertical setting and move them in. I think we're seeing a lot more exploration with that type of model, especially around tree nurseries, for instance, where they're starting to grow those the tree seedlings from in the vertical setting, and then moving them out into their outdoor homes. So all of that is really, really valuable insights. And again, going back to different ways that we can apply this technology to make it really useful on a larger scale in different regions. And that might be, greenhouse production might look very different in different regions, but knowing that it has that capability is a really great highlight. So thanks so much.
Mm-hmm.
Caleb, did you want to add anything to that before we move on to the next question?
Sure. I think, I appreciate that India and Paul both brought up this pairing between vertical ag and outdoor ag, agroecological practices, regenerative practices, and, the necessary value of soil and the land itself. And I appreciate that in the MENA region, that pairing right now is very aspirational. And there's some work that needs to be done from a technology perspective. But I think there's also a philosophical perspective. For example, we use the word vertical farming, and we don't always apply the vertical piece appropriately. Sometimes we think, I want to go as high as I can, and we forget about the burden on the economics with the vertical relationship. And I've studied several of these large controlled environment ag buildings and implementations that have failed in the Middle East, in Europe, and in the United States. And almost always they fail because of the cost of climate controlling such vertical space. It creates microclimates as you go, and it creates a tremendous amount of energy to cool 30 or 40 feet in the air compared to 10 or 15 feet in the air. And so, you make a great point, Paul, about your capital costs in building that initial infrastructure, your fixed cost, so to speak, as you termed it. However, there's an operating cost that is often the thing that drags down the controlled environment agriculture, especially if it's not paired properly with outdoor ag, and if we're not thinking about the whole system holistically. I think that's where a lot of the complexities in delivering in the MENA region arise, is this trade-off between capital costs and operating costs, and how do I properly manage that? And I'm not sure that we all know the right solution yet, but I think there's some real viability in in a modular approach to controlled environment ag, or a modular approach to vertical, where we start to segment within that space the area and climate control each segment or each module, so that we can be efficient with our capital costs, we can be efficient with our operating costs, and we can still deliver in a timely manner. What I think that allows us to do is really leverage this land, because to your point, arable land is overburdened, but non-arable land is not. It's ubiquitous. You can find it everywhere. It's cheap. It's readily available. It's right next to where everyone lives. And is there an opportunity to leverage that land in a really smart economic model that produces the right companions to what is produced on land? So yes, we have to grow our grains right now in a traditional setting, so to speak. It can be agroecological, it can be regenerative, we can do cover crops and really make proper utilization of that land. But can we then pair vertical farming nearby that's done in a modular way, so it keeps our operating costs down and manages our capital costs, and create a symbiotic relationship, so to speak, between those two? Maybe in our vertical farm, we're producing some waste that can go back into fertilizer for the land management. And maybe we can better utilize that relationship. I think that's a key piece for land management to me, because I do think the answer to your question is maybe. Maybe vertical farming can be an economical and sustainable model, but it is not inherently, or is not without great work and planning. So it does require quite a bit of work and thoughtfulness to make it economical and therefore sustainable. And that's where I think the burden on us comes, is, as players in this space, innovators that are trying to create technology, we can't just say, yeah, look, we can produce. It has to be that we can produce at a price point that everyone can consume it. We can produce with the resources made available, and we do it in partnership with others. We really need to work together. It can't just be each one of us in our own silos, so to speak, building these technologies and saying, it is what it is, take it. I don't think that's the right answer. And so therefore, for me, it's a maybe. There's a tremendous amount of potential, but we have to work together, and we have to bring the best practices from producers. We can't ignore what they know, and we have to then leverage technology to support that.
Absolutely.
I think Caleb, that's a great. I agree with you. I think one of the most exciting pieces to what you're saying is that the technology is growing by leaps and bounds. Is being refined by leaps and bounds. I know our lighting, for example, we make it in-house here, and the 5 years the company's been in existence, we've seen we're on the third iteration of the lighting, and each time the PPFDs and all the rest to get significantly more profitable, if you will, and strong in growing the plants. I think you're talking about a fledgling industry, and I mean in the scheme of things. And I think what's going to happen is that maybe 4 or 5 years ago, you were absolutely right. It was not economically viable. But I do see in 4 or 5 years that it's going to be significantly more viable, if not completely so. Not only the fact that what we're growing for plants right now are plants that were developed for outdoors. So, and they have a much more stringent requirement as far as their environment in which they grow. And I think one of the most dynamic areas right now is the development in the seed, in the plant cultivars, reduction of the roots. They don't need the roots that they need outside, and the ability to tolerate a higher temperature, if you will, in those microclimates. In addition to, if you have a 20-foot or 20-level rack, you grow warmer plants up here and you grow cooler plants down here. I mean, there's ways to address that. And but I agree with you fully. The HVAC piece of these systems is one of the most challenging.
Yeah, absolutely. Those are all great points. And Caleb, I feel like you answered a lot of our last question, which was around what do you all kind of expect to be the greatest challenges for vertical farming and building a vertical farm within the MENA region. I think you've touched on so many aspects of how collaboration right now amongst those in the industry is really key to understanding and how to deliver the most efficient, most economical product that can be applicable in different regions. And I think a lot of the time understanding the local conditions, what land is available and how can that be used and capitalized on is really, really important for us to think about and put ourselves in different regional perspectives as well. So there's a lot definitely that can be done in order to kind of address and come together collaboratively within the industry. I think this is a great start to that, I think, from our perspective at Cultivated, to really start looking at regional perspectives and understanding the agricultural conditions in places like the MENA region. I'm just looking at the time and we only have about 5 minutes left. So I just wanted to give everybody a chance to kind of add their final thoughts around that last comment around vertical farming, and if there's any other sort of hurdles that you see as a major challenge in getting into the industry and building vertical farming systems within the MENA region. Any final thoughts?
We haven't heard from India in a while.
India, you're good.
So I'm actually going to echo a lot of what you said there. So coming from a European perspective, the main challenge that we saw entering would be around implementing climate control. So the heating, ventilation, air conditioning systems that we use in our current projects in the UK and Europe are just not equipped for an arid climate. And it's something that we're actually actively looking to collaborate on. We think that obviously as experts in aeroponics, we have a lot to offer the MENA region in terms of water efficiency, but we're never going to pretend to be an expert in arid climates, particularly in HVAC systems in arid climates. So we're actually actively looking out to work with local experts, local partners within the region who can collaborate, particularly on the building envelope, as well as the HVAC system as well, because obviously those two need to work together so synchronistically. And it's one of the many reasons that we're going to AgraME next week.
Wonderful. Well, that's great. Paul, did you have any final thoughts?
Yeah, I do. I think this region in particular has got a very interesting situation. We've been talking about economics of growing. We talk in infrastructure and all the rest. But frankly, the bottom line is feeding people. And if you have a population that is not eating properly or as well as they could, and I think that's a very important piece to consider also. That to be honest with you, if you can break even and feed people, I'm okay with that. And I think that's a very important piece that our company looks at, and we work to that end. Yeah, of course, you've got to be profitable in some respects, and it's okay to be profitable when people are not hungry anymore, and that's important.
For sure. Thank you so much. And Caleb, since your area of expertise is on the animal feed side of things, is there any closing remarks you have around that and why it's, a really viable option for the MENA region?
Just a little. I think we've covered quite a bit of ground today.
Yeah.
But I think to restate, I do believe in vertical farming, especially for the MENA region and for the rest of the world as well. But I think vertical farming needs to include production for livestock. And the reason for that, as we talked about, is this relationship between milk, meat, and eggs, and health, but also lifting folks out of poverty and providing efficient resources, locally and domestically. And so I think vertical farming needs to solve that problem as well. It's not just for the leafy greens and the fruits and the vegetables, but it's also for the animal production. And to do that, it has to be, as India described, in partnership with land-based agriculture to produce the grain. But there is a regenerative cycle there between both systems that allows, I think, the MENA region to be very optimistic about the future of vertical farming and what we can do. And then I think there's a real play from a technology perspective to look at passive heating and cooling of the air, leveraging the environment of the MENA region. There's extreme temperature differences through the day. And so using technology to store the energy during the day and to release it during the night, where that temperature exchange becomes very valuable, I think has promised to eliminate this HVAC concern, the heating, ventilation, air conditioning issue. And our approach is to think about this in a modular way. Rather than thinking of vertical farming as these big, vast buildings with tremendous space, and they seem to extend in for eternity when you're standing in the middle of one, to think of it as a segmented modular approach where each area has its own control, where it can be very efficient, and then we can passively exchange temperatures between those areas and allow the natural cycle in the MENA region of a hot, blistering day and a cool, almost cold evening and night to really allow for a cost-efficient exchange of temperature and storage of energy. And I think that modular piece needs to be talked about more in this space. We'd love to talk about these big grand projects that make all the news, $100 million on this building and that building. And it's really cool. That's what we like as humans. We like big, impressive things. But I don't think that's the future of vertical ag. I think the future of vertical ag is modular design that's extremely efficient, and it leverages the machine as the structure. And the machine as the structure and as the environment that wraps itself and it controls its own environment. The data is there to support this. We just haven't pushed ourselves to deliver on it as a group, as a vertical ag group, because it doesn't necessarily reward itself in the media. Maybe that's one reason, or maybe there's many other reasons. I don't want to pretend to know all the reasons why we haven't done it yet. But that's something that we're really focused on, and I would encourage everyone to focus on, is this modular approach. There's other benefits as far as controlling or containing any outbreaks, or if there's a repair piece that needs to happen, it doesn't shut the whole facility down. And there's all sorts of redundancy built into modular approaches. But I think the most promising piece is an efficient control of the environment. And when I say control, I believe that's a misnomer. We're mitigating environment as much as we can. We can't really control it, but we can mitigate it. And I think as a group and as a region, that should be a focus.
And Caleb, just quickly, because I know we're out of time here, but we have developed a whole indoor racking system for fodder alone, because we agree with you. Just having a fodder system that can feed animals and develop protein for folks, critically important. So we see that as a future too.
Yeah, I agree.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, Caleb, for those remarks. It's absolutely critical for us to be thinking about scale modularity as well, and the applicable, how each can be applied in each different setting, region, business model, all of those things. So that's great. Thank you so much. And India and Paul, thank you both so much as well for joining, for your valuable insights today. It's been a real pleasure. I feel like we didn't have enough time. We'll maybe have to make this an hour for the next one to make sure we can keep the conversation going, but it's been really valuable. I know I have a lot to think about on my 19-hour flight to Dubai tomorrow. So I thank you all so much again. And to our audience, thank you so much for tuning in. We really appreciate it. We hope to have more webinars coming your way in the next few months. So stay tuned for more, but thank you again. And Paul, India, Caleb, is the best way to get in touch with you on your websites, LinkedIn? How should people reach out?
The website would probably be the best way to get in touch with us. I popped the link in the chat, but generally it's just letusgrow.com/contact us.
Thanks, India. Paul, same with you. Is the website best way to get in touch with you?
Oh, best way? Yes, our website, www.growhive.com, growhyve.com, and I'll put that in the comment.
Perfect. Thank you. And Caleb, you have dropped your email in there, caleb@renaissanceegg.com. Wonderful. Thank you again, everyone. Have a wonderful day. Take care.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.